Okay, we turn our focus this morning to nutrition in schools and how it contributes to overall learning. So according to a recent opinion piece by some education activists, the Basic Education Department should have plans in place to ensure that pupils receive nutritious meals. In some communities, that may be their only meal for the day. So let's bring in the head of research at Equal Education, Hopolang Selebalo, joins us this morning. It's great to see you, Hopolang. Thanks very much for coming on. Perhaps as a start, just give us the current status of the National School Nutrition Program.
Good morning, Michelle, and thank you for having me on. So the piece that we wrote was essentially a reflection on the work that was done at the height of COVID-19. The current status around the NSNP is that learners are receiving meals at school every day as they've been prior to the hard lockdowns and the rotational school attendance. So from about February, March, when learners all returned to school full-time, they were able to receive those meals. At the moment, the judgment, or at least the court order that we had gotten into with the Department of Basic Education and other provincial departments has been suspended by mutual agreement, pending anything else happening. So if we find ourselves in a situation similar to that we faced in 2020, then we will have to revisit and revise and look at how learners are able to access meals. So by that I mean if we go into hard lockdown again, learners have to attend on rotation. But to answer your question, things are back to what they used to be prior to the pandemic and hard lockdown.
So are you saying that this court order, which, because of the work done by activists like yourselves, that it was put in place as a response to learners not being able to access their daily meals due to the hard lockdown because, of course, schools were closed during that period. Does it mean that there is a risk that we might go back to the court not insisting that they are given a meal every day?
No. So the NSNP is a program that's been in existence for a number of years now. I'm sure it's over 2 decades or 2 decades. So we are certain that learners are receiving meals through the program as is normal. So the suspension of the court order essentially means that the Department of Basic Education and provincial education departments don't need to report to us, EE, through the Equal Education Law Center or Section 27 on a monthly basis on how school meals are being rolled out, because learners are in school every day and the standard is that learners receive a meal a day when they're at school.
Yeah.
But to go back to your initial comment about the court order, yes, it was definitely, and the court case, it was initiated after the NSNP was suspended by Minister Mochega in March 2020. And we could see, we were in a prolonged lockdown period that kept shifting. And then even after we were, when the different levels changed, learners were still not all attending school at the same time. I believe learners only went back on a rotational basis, mind you, from about August 2020. Matriculants and learners in grade 7, if I remember correctly, started going back to school in June, but the rest of the other classes only started going back the end of August 2020. So it meant that they were for months without access to the NSNP.
This article that you and your colleagues wrote about this issue was also in part because of World Food Day, right? Which I understand is commemorated around the world on the 16th of October. So, it brings into question whether we shouldn't be expanding, because it's called the School Nutrition Program. Even before COVID-19, the numbers in terms of households that were experiencing hunger were in the millions, right? So if we're thinking about the fact that this might be the only meal that so many learners are having on a single day, is there no way we can expand the nutrition program, Hopolang, so that they are perhaps taking a meal home as well? Because how are we expecting them to go home and study for exams, for example, without having another meal?
I think that's a great question. You cited or you noted that even prior to COVID, food insecurity was rife. You know, millions of households were struggling, and millions more definitely did in the period following the hard lockdown and COVID. And we're still seeing the after effects of that. In fact, many households are still in that situation. We know that our economic situation isn't exactly the greatest at the moment, you know, and many households are struggling. And as far as I know, there are some schools that provide, for example, more than one meal a day. Some schools, not all schools, to qualifying learners. But I agree with you in terms of just making it a habit or expanding the NSNP to ensure that learners get more than one meal per day. But that being said, I mean, the MTBPS, the medium-term budget policy statement, is happening next week. And we are consistently, as Equal Education, advocating for more money to be allocated to the Department of Basic Education and provincial education departments. And in fact, if anything, we've seen more money being taken away from education, particularly at the height of COVID, in the midst of COVID. And we know that at the budget speech earlier this year, in terms of monies allocated to the NSNP, it just barely kept up with inflation. So the expansion in this context, I think, is going to be quite difficult, even though we know that it's necessary for learners and their families to ensure that learners are able to go to school, they're able to study, they're able to do their homework, etc. So the best that we can do right now, I believe, is to advocate for more money to be given to programs such as the NSNP, programs such as the Education Infrastructure Grant and other conditional grants that are necessary to ensure that learners are receiving equal and quality education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any parent out there will tell you just how much a child eats. They are constantly hungry. And this is tied to our education outcomes. Hopolang, let me thank you for your time this morning. Hopolang Selebalo is the head of research at Equal Education. Such an important story, this. The importance of school nutrition for learning outcomes and just for the ability of children to go to school.